This war, in a certain sense, had to be. More forces had been unleashed than could now be contained. But at that short, brief moment of time, Homer seems to be saying, this is how conflict should be resolved between the only interested parties.
Though ending a war with a duel between two leaders may be wishful fantasy, many of Homer's observations of battle are timelessly true.
One of the underlying themes that you draw out of the Iliad and the Odyssey that remains relevant today in a military setting is that character matters. That theme remains with us. We still are very concerned for the character of our officers and our soldiers.
Modern armies can learn from the soldiers of the Trojan War. Although the greatest of the Greek warriors, Achilles, might not last long in today's army. In front of other warlords, Achilles threatened and insulted Agamemnon, his commanding officer.
What a worthless, burnt-out coward I'd be called if I would submit to you and all your orders. Whatever you blurt out, fling them at others. Don't give me commands. Never again, I trust, will Achilles yield to you.
To Homer's audience, Achilles' rage against Agamemnon reflected a hero defending his honor. But today, he would be court-martialed for insubordination.
Achilles was preoccupied with his reputation and his personal standing amongst the Greeks. The absolute opposite of a team player. Odysseus is of course, a different character, and again, he's yet another expression of the fact that character matters. He is wily. He's compared to a fox. Even today, we compare some of our most capable military figures to foxes.
The swamp fox, Francis Marion of the American Revolution, and General Franks of the war in Iraq are among some reputed to have the cunning of a fox. But Homer highlighted another key quality of leadership by demonstrating the opposite.
Never once did you arm with the troops and go to battle. You lack the courage. King who devours his people.
Unlike George Washington, who led his troops by example, Agamemnon was accused of lagging at the back, while others fought and died.
Agamemnon is arrogant, overweening, very much given to advance his own personal agenda, and inclined in the mind of others to take advantage of his position for his personal gain rather than to be a servant of the rest.
The soldier who was idealized by Homer was Hector, who fought for Troy. He had the character of the model soldier and citizen.
Hector is more inclined to set the welfare of his people and his city above his own reputation and his own survival. And ultimately, he faced down Achilles even though he knew that the odds were against him and that his time was up.
The battle between the two greatest heroes, the Greek Achilles and the Trojan Hector, is the climax of the Iliad and Homer's story of Troy. When Hector took leave of his wife and child on his way to battle, Homer foreshadowed the end of the war and tilted the sympathies of his audience in favor of the Trojans.
Hector envisages that Andromache will be a widow and that his son Astyanax will be an orphan. And like any true husband there, he says, I care for you more than I do for my countrymen. It's your fate that really matters to me.
Homer portrayed Hector as a family man. While the Greeks were fighting for revenge and greed, Hector was fighting to defend his wife, his child, and his home.
The Trojans, in a sense, are us, and it is through their eyes, very largely, through the eyes of men like Hector, that we read the events that are going to be so shattering.
Hector saw Achilles charging like a stallion. With his helmet flashing, Achilles threw his spear and missed. Hector hurled his spear, striking Achilles' shield dead center. Drew his sword and charged, but Achilles had a second spear and drove it clean through Hector's neck. Falling to the dust, Hector gasped, pleading with Achilles to return his dead body to Troy. Achilles replied he would feed his body to the dogs, lashed his corpse to his chariot, whipped his horses to run round the walls of Troy, and, according to Homer, defiled Hector's body in the land of his own fathers. In the last great scene of Homer's poem, King Priam came to beg for the mutilated body of his son.
And King Priam comes, and he grasps the man-slaying hands of Achilles, and like a suppliant, he appeals to Achilles' compassion. And Achilles yields, and the two men collapse together in an acknowledgement of their human identity. They're no longer Greek and Trojan. They're no longer deadly enemies. Instead, they are like father and son.
It's at this point that Homer reveals his subversive mission. He ended what is perhaps the world's greatest war story with an anti-war message.
We are all human. We are all fathers and sons. We all have attachments that go way beyond our national identity. We are human beings, first and foremost.
A truce was declared for the cremation of Hector's body. Funeral laments were sung. The flames from the fire consumed his corpse, and watching over are the walls of Troy.
Homer does not elect for a Hollywood ending. He elects for an ending which reminds us that more slaughter is to follow. Homer is saying to us, his audience, in a way, you are not to be trusted. More havoc will surely follow. More brutality, more carnage, and ultimately, too, the destruction of Troy.
Although this completed Homer's story, the true story of Troy did not end there. Suddenly, the Greeks were gone, and a wooden horse was standing outside the gates of Troy. The most famous symbol of Troy, the Trojan horse, comes from legends other than Homer's Iliad.
The legend tells us that this was a war that was not won by uncommon acts of valor, by steadfastness and military discipline, all the qualities that we might expect. On the contrary, it was won by a devastating ruse. It was won by deception, deceit, and conspiracy, and all the things that we might consider to be dishonorable in the conduct of warfare.
After 10 years of battle, the Greeks and Trojans fought to a stalemate. Then a Greek named Odysseus came up with a plan. The Greeks built a giant wooden horse, left it as an offering to the Trojans, and then sailed away. Some Trojans were skeptical, with one, Laocoon, warning, "Beware Greeks bearing gifts." But according to myth, he and his sons were silenced by serpents that dragged them into the sea. The Trojans desperately wanted to believe that the horse was a peace offering.
And the Trojans broke their walls down to let the horse enter, stuffed full as it was with Greek soldiers. And in the night, as the Trojans were celebrating the departure of the Greeks,